Hello and welcome to the first stack of the year. And what a joyful episode it is. We speak with the person responsible for one of France's most important food guides, Le Fooding. And as we celebrate the new year, we also celebrate the launch of 2 new magazines. Enjoy. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show in France. France's culinary reputation needs little introduction. But how do you decide which brasseries, cafes, and wine bars should be top of the list? Le Fooding's 2025 guide has done the hard work for you. Monocle's writer Claudia Jacobs sits down with the publication's co-CEO, Christine Doublet, to understand why, 25 years later, Le Fooding continues to commit its recommendations to print and how the publication gives a voice to underrepresented players in the industry.
So Le Fooding is celebrating its 25th anniversary this coming year. It was launched in 2000 by 2 music journalists who couldn't find any food publications that they felt at the time reflected the amount of interesting stuff that was actually happening in the food world in France. So they launched Le Fooding as a supplement to a music magazine that existed at the time called Nova Magazine. Le Fooding was kind of this one-off publication that came out once a year for about 10 years, linked to different publications in France. So first Nova, then Libération, which is like a big newspaper in France, then the Nouvelle Obs, and now it's been independently published for about the past 15 years.
Yeah. And since then you've launched an app and your content is also available online, but you still continue to publish this guide in print once a year. Why is it still important to produce something in print, something physical that people can actually touch and feel, as well as the regular content that you have online?
I think it's important in the sense that Le Fooding was print-based at the beginning. So it's something that we've always sort of held on to. And also one of the things that makes Le Fooding different compared to regular guides is there's also a very important sort of artistic illustration photography side to Le Fooding. So every year in our guide, we work with about 10 to 12 different illustrators and photographers. We try to work with new, independent, up-and-coming artists every year. So that's also something that is harder to translate online and that we're very attached to have this sort of beautiful object that comes out once a year with, of course, all of the best new restaurants, bars, wine shops, food shops, and hotels, but also something that shows, what other interesting stuff is happening in culture. And this is through illustration and photography.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth saying that this guide that I've got in front of me, it's not just a guide to restaurants, but, you also consider sort of, the politics of food and the culture of eating. And yeah, there are beautiful visuals that really bring it to life and consider what kind of a place food has had and continues to have within French society. I mean, the cover of this beautiful guide for 2025 has the tricolore colours on it. I mean, obviously, it's been quite a tumultuous year for French politics. How do you see that as intersecting with the work that you're doing for Le Fooding?
Yeah, I mean, this year it was pretty, so every year there's a different theme to the guide. So just to give a little bit of background, last year's theme, for example, was about image. So how is food represented through photography, through our imagination, through social media, through AI, through many different things. And this year, it was pretty obvious to us that the subject that's not only actually affecting people in France, but, there were super impactful elections in England and super, disappointing elections in the United States. And it's a subject that's not just French, but it was pretty obvious to us that we wanted to talk about sort of politics. And the table is, like when you come together around a meal, it's also a place where people come together and talk about a lot of subjects. notably what's happening in the country and in the world today. So it seemed very natural for us to say, we're bringing people together around the table and let's talk about what's going on in the country and what does France look like today. And it looks very different for a lot of different people. And so we wanted to try and cover as much ground as possible to say there are many different Frances and here's what they look like for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that Le Fooding does so well is that you kind of consider the status quo at the time of when you're publishing. I mean, obviously the most sort of obvious comparison to your guide is Michelin, but obviously you do completely different things in terms of food. You know, you informalize the gastronomic experience and you really look at how it can apply to just the average person and why sort of some of the restaurant standards that people set in France are maybe a little too rigid. I mean, how do you see the comparison between Le Fooding and Michelin?
I mean, I just think that, so maybe you know, or maybe you don't know, but Le Fooding was purchased by the Michelin Group, not the Michelin Guide, which is an important distinction, a few years ago, but with the desire to keep both those publications completely independent. For example, I have no idea how a Michelin star is attributed, and they don't intervene at all in how we select restaurants. And I think it's just a very different way of looking at food and at the dining experience, because what's the most important for Le Fooding, the only criteria we give to our journalists who go out and test restaurants is, would you go back?
Yeah.
It's a very sort of subjective, but also something that's very attached to what is the basis of the word fooding, which is the feeling you get from having been in that restaurant. The Michelin Guide, which looks at a whole long list of criteria, so it's in a bit of a way more of a cold rating system, whereas us, it's very emotional.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it reflects the sort of new sort of wave of French restaurants, which is becoming a lot more casual and a lot more international, and it's not sort of taking itself maybe so seriously, which I think is something that is captured really well in this sort of light-hearted guide. How do you ensure that you get a strong sort of geographical spread of restaurants, of cafes, bars, etc. across France? Obviously, you know, Paris is considered the epicenter of France's culinary prowess, but how do you make sure that the whole of France is included?
I think it happened pretty naturally. I mean, we have about 70 people who write for us in France currently. I'd say about 5% of those people are journalists and 95% are, you know, sort of like regular Joes who are just passionate about food and who do this on the side. And all of these people come from different places in France. So even if they live in Paris, you know, they go on the weekends to different places. So we do have sort of a wide reach of people who are feeding us information from all across France. And then also it's something that's happened pretty naturally post-COVID, I think not only in France, but in a lot of countries where more and more people are opening in smaller towns or opening in the countryside, both for reasons of wanting to be closer to local produce, local vegetables, et cetera, and to have a more balanced family life. So it's sort of naturally, Le Fooding always had a split between Paris and the rest of France, which was sort of 50-50. And it's been shifting a lot more to 75%, 25%, I'd say in the past 4 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's definitely a shift as well in terms of tourism, in terms of people looking to visit not just Paris, but other cities and regions within France. So I think it's impressive that you managed to reflect that so clearly within the guide. Why is it so important to democratize the experience of eating, of going to a restaurant? I mean, you know, part of the appeal with reviews is that people can have a feel for what the place is like before they go there. You know, whatever impression it is that they're given from reading what you publish in Le Fooding. But why is it important to give people that sort of sense before they get to an institution?
I think what's interesting or important to us is that when we test a restaurant, we usually don't have any information or very little information about who the owner is, who the chef is, how the restaurant was started. And once the restaurant's been, you know, validated by one of our writers, then you do a bunch of information check and stuff. And what we find is that in general, the most sincere and humble sort of stories end up making the best restaurants. And that's really what we want to highlight is, people who are passionate about what they do. So who are going to treat each customer in that same humble, simple, sincere, passionate way. And it reflects in the food, it reflects in the service, it reflects in, how they treat their producers and sourcers who they work with. And those are the stories that we try to highlight through our guide. Those are the people who don't have, let's say, as much budget to use for PR and communications. And so we're really happy that we're able to sort of shine a spotlight on them with our guide.
Yeah, and that's an important point as well, is that, as you say, you are financially independent. And I mean, you even on the website, you post a picture of the receipt after the writer has eaten at the place to show how much it's cost. And that is an important thing to note because, it's becoming a very competitive and saturated environment, eating out, especially in France. And so it's important that people know that they're getting an independent person reviewing it and they're getting an opinion that's honest and it's not just led by someone who's got the money, say, to pay someone to review it. So that's definitely an important point. And it's worth also adding that you do also cover Belgium a little bit, don't you?
Yes, we do. We launched 2 years ago. So this year was our second guide. And actually, it was a amazing British illustrator named Sophie Hollington who did this year's cover in Belgium. But yeah, we launched Belgium 2 years ago. And what was really interesting for us is, in the nicest way possible, no one ever says, oh, wow, I can't wait to go to Belgium and sample the food scene. We talk about Italy, we talk about Spain, we talk, of course, in the past, like 15 years about Denmark and the Nordic countries. And so it was that same sort of reasoning behind when the fooding was launched 20 years ago. It's like, let's go see what's happening in Belgium. And there's so much interesting, exciting stuff happening in Flanders, in Wallonia, in Brussels, and just people who weren't being highlighted at all outside of local magazines or newspapers. But there was, first of all, no countrywide food publication that covered both the Flanders side and the French-speaking side. So that was super interesting to us. And then abroad, even in France, which is so close to Belgium, people are completely unaware of what's going on the other side of the border. So it was super interesting for us to go there and to find all this exciting sort of unique food happening.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like you say, I recently went to Belgium and I was pleasantly surprised by all the amazing food there. Do you plan on expanding any more to any other sort of countries or regions that you maybe feel are underrepresented?
I mean, so the thing is, once you start working in Dutch, which is, let's say, challenging language, it just sort of makes sense to continue working in that language once you've sort of got a handle on it. So we have been talking quite a lot about the Netherlands, which I think sort of fits into that category of, people go to Amsterdam for the art or for, whatever else, but it's not someplace where you'd say, oh, let's go eat a bunch of exciting food in Amsterdam. So we have been talking about the Netherlands, but launching a country and doing it well, which is what we believe we did in Belgium, takes a lot of time. And we wouldn't want to do it if we didn't have the time and the resources to do it as well as we've done in France and Belgium. So it's stuff we're discussing. But
yeah, exciting. Yeah, I look forward to seeing what happens with that. And just quickly before I let you go, I'm intrigued if you could pick one or two places from the 2025 guide that really stand out to you, what would they be?
So every year in the guide, of course, we do in French, it's called the palmarès, but so the awards of the best new restaurants of the year. And I'd say two of the most exciting places to me that I've been is, first of all, Iñaki Aspitart, who's pretty well known on the French and international food scene, recently moved back to his hometown in the south of France, which is interesting with what we were saying about people, sort of leaving Paris and going to the countryside. And he's, been cooking for however many years, 30 or 40 years, he's like 50, I think. And by being in this new city, by being so close to the ocean, by being so close to this local produce, he's become totally reinvested in the kitchen and re-energized. And it was one of the most delicious, exciting meals I had this year. So that's definitely worth a trip. And it's also a region where we gave out a lot of other prizes. So there's a lot of exciting food happening in the Basque country right now in France. And then the other address I would say maybe in Paris is Ubat's, which is a pizzeria opened by the team who has rigmarole and folderole. And it's great because they had this guy who was making pizzas at their previous restaurant while they were on maternity and paternity leave. And the pizzas were so good that they decided to open a business with him. So it's great to be able to get those pizzas now in Paris because they're so, so delicious.
Merci, Christine. And Le Fooding 2025 is out now. Moving along to Footnote, a beautiful new journal for artistic exchange. For every issue, the title invites writers, photographers, artists to respond to one central text, all newly commissioned. A brilliant idea by the editor-in-chief and creative director Alex Hunting, whose studio is responsible for the design of Kinfolk magazine, among others. To tell us more about the idea of Footnote, Alex paid us a visit here at Midori House.
The tagline is a journal for artistic exchange. I had the idea sort of a couple of years ago, really, but it's taken, between client work and various life commitments, a little while to sort of come to life. But really, the concept behind it is each issue we commission a piece of fiction, and then we invite artists, photographers, writers, poets, etc., to essentially react to the piece and to the piece of writing. And so essentially created the magazine as a collection of visual and literary footnotes to that piece. So yeah, really it becomes the magazine as a study of that piece of writing. And we talk about sort of artistic exchange because it's quite pure conceptually in the sense that all the contributors are, they're picking a word, phrase or idea from the text. And then their contribution is a photo essay or a piece of fiction, a piece of poetry. So there's a real variety of sort of creative responses to the text.
What I find fascinating about Footnote that everything's a new commission, because you would imagine a magazine doing perhaps, a reflection on an amazing art piece that everybody knows, but this is super interesting. It's something new. It's very exciting in many ways.
Yeah, I've always been interested as the idea of sort of a muse, so to speak. And I think obviously throughout history, writing has inspired, all sorts of pieces of art and, works, but I've never really sort of seen it necessarily in a sort of a print format, or like a space where different sort of disciplines can react to the same thing. And it's been quite an interesting process really, because whilst we've commissioned, there's a real variety of responses. It kind of has the themes of the piece of writing really sort of flow through the magazine. So even though there'd be quite diverse sort of contributions, whether it's a short story or a piece of poetry, a photo essay, they hopefully gel together quite well.
And tell us about the contributors. I mean, it's an amazing list here at the back page, from Fergal Sharkey to, Pemi Aguda and many more.
Yeah.
Did you knew those people? How did it work, the commission process? Because they had to, of course, understand, the piece that they have to base something on, right?
Yeah, of course. So the hardest aspect of the magazine really was essentially commissioning, the text, originating the text. And so I approached, it's probably about 18 months ago, George Upton, who's the editor of Footnote. And I've worked with him before on some other editorial projects. He's currently also the deputy editor at Kinfolk. And he was really up for being involved in it. So we sort of initially set about trying to, select that writer for the first piece. And, we went back and forth in terms of how established the writer should be, whether in fact it should be a piece of writing that's already been published, all sorts of things. And we sort of landed on, we'd both read this A.K. Blakemore, her recent book, The Glutton, and she's just an incredible writer, and the piece of writing is just so visual, her writing style, really descriptive. And so we just thought it'd be the perfect piece for our contributors. So I guess coming back to your question about approaching them, first of all, the key, the writing had to be, a really beautiful piece of writing. She's written this story, Peg, which is a story of decay. It's about a river demon. So it's quite dark and quite eerie, but really beautifully written. So essentially, the contributors we approached is a combination of people that I'd worked with in the past and, new people. And obviously the joy of starting a magazine, and obviously I work in print a lot, and editorial a lot. So I've got a lot of relationships with people, but the joy of a magazine like this is, the ability to, approach new people, build those relationships going forward. And obviously George, he's the words sort of guy in that sense, obviously I'm a reader, but not to the degree of him. So he had some fantastic ideas about the writers that we should approach. So yeah, we've got visually contributions from Jack Davison, Sarah Blaise, Joe Cruz, Mattia Balsamini, Femi Aguda, Ely Williams, Brian Dillon. So there's a really, fabulous mix of people in there.
It's a confident launch. I love the design of it. I have to say, it's largish format. It's bigger than usual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what is this effect on the cover? I love that. That's a good kind of tactile bit that I love it.
Yeah, there's this, the design language is relatively pared back, I guess, inside, because a lot of it's a space for the contributors, their pieces to sort of come through, but it's sort of gelled together with these footnote symbols, which annotate the main text. And I've sort of used them as image as well, kind of like graphic devices. So yeah, on the cover, there's a spot varnish that sort of overlaid over the top, which has this sort of abstract letter F, which is the sort of footnote symbol. But yeah, hopefully it gives a nice contrast against the uncoated cover.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, as you're here, of course, you are a magazine man. You have your own studio. And of course, we have to start one of your biggest projects, of course, is Kinfolk. We featured Dan here on the stack.
You had Harriet in here, didn't you?
It's a classic, right? I mean, Kinfolk. How old is Kinfolk?
Oh, don't put me on
Sorry
the spot.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah. Well, we had the
It's a while. It's been a while.
It's a very long time. I mean, I've been working on Kinfolk for, I think, probably 7 years, something like that. Quite a long time. I think so. We had a 10th anniversary. We're on issue 55 now. Just sent it to press this week, actually. And issue 50 was the 10th anniversary, so I guess that makes it about 11-ish years old. But yeah, it's a big magazine, isn't it, in the indie world, I guess. I guess it's sort of crossed over from that a little bit. But yeah, it's been an absolute joy, one of the real sort of joys of my career, I guess, to work on it. It's just such an amazing team and, yeah, lovely magazine.
Are you in love with print? Are you kind of a magazine aficionado, or perhaps not necessarily, maybe?
So I do increasingly like a mix of stuff in the studio. Do a lot of editorial work, but also visual identity work and digital work. But yeah, very much my original passion in design was print. And I guess it still is, really. It's still something that I get approached to do quite a lot. And yeah, I love it very much. You had Jeremy Leslie. He comes on this a lot, doesn't he?
Yeah, he was here. I think he was on the show just a few weeks ago.
So I'll give a little shout out to Jeremy. I did an internship when I was at college I did a year out in the middle of my degree. And I applied and I worked with Jeremy. He used to run an independent magazine conference called Colophon many years ago in Luxembourg. And I basically did the internship for sort of a few months, was to work on the book. And it was just a book basically celebrating independent magazines. For me, as a design student, that was really inspiring. It exposed me to all these kind of amazing, different, exciting print magazines. And so when I went back into my final year, I really focused a lot on, editorial sort of was a thing that really excited me. And I think that's carried on really throughout my career.
I looked at some of your other projects. One, I have to say, I didn't know before, but Sabato, which is a supplement, looks beautiful. And I think there is something to newspaper supplements these days. They're becoming very, very important in a way.
Yeah, I love that project, actually. It's the Saturday luxury supplement to L'Echo and De Tige. So it's essentially the Belgian FT, I guess, the Belgian financial newspaper. Really lovely project. I think there's a bit more space in those, in the sort of supplement magazines for, I guess they don't have the same level of commerciality. I mean, they do, but they don't, because they're not directly on the newsstand.
You can take risks, perhaps.
Exactly. I mean, you look at obviously the New York Times magazine, but, FT Mag and, there's all sorts of Le Monde, like fantastic newspaper supplements. So yeah, that was a real joy to work on.
Thank you, Alex. And you can buy the first issue of Footnote at footnotemag.com. We move swiftly to Jakarta now to feature another brand new print title. In fact, Wonderwhy have been documenting daily life in Southeast Asia digitally for a few years, and now they're also in print. In the first issue of Wonderwhy magazine, the city walker is celebrated. Think of it as a stroll through urban culture, favorite shops, and a vibrant city heartbeat. I had the pleasure to speak with Wonderwhy's editor-in-chief, Hana Irena.
We actually started in 2021. Our holding company is an advertising agency, and we do a lot of cultural research for our social media clients. So our team thought it would be nice to share our findings with the general public, and that's how Wonderwhy was born. We used to do everything online. We were very active on social media, writing articles for our website. We also share in-depth cultural reports. And since we're based in Indonesia, our content was in Bahasa Indonesia in Indonesian. But starting this year, we decided to expand our reach to Southeast Asia.
And it's great that it's in English because, of course, it's great for people in the region. You know, there's many countries. It's a very buzzy region. But I feel that even for someone that wants to visit the area, a magazine like Wonderwhy would be super useful because it's not your typical like travel magazine. It really goes in depth about how a transport works in different cities, right?
Yes, so actually we wanted to make Wonderwhy talk about the daily life, daily microcultures of Southeast Asia, because we see that Southeast Asia is a very vibrant region. We have a lot of similarities as well. So Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, and other Southeast Asian countries. And I feel like there's not a lot of media that talks about these daily life stuff happening in this region. So people maybe talk about the traditional cultures of maybe like food and the dances, but daily cultures is something that we want to dig deeper into.
And especially the shops. I mean, even you mentioned in the magazine, perhaps sometimes they're not the most pedestrian-friendly streets, but they are exciting. There's lots of things happening. If you're just going for a stroll, you know, in Jakarta, in Bangkok, or any of the big capitals.
Yeah, it's a very vibrant region. Not the most walkable, but I think a lot of people are very excited to walk here. And that shows how, you know, even though it's not walkable, people are excited to walk.
So although you were based in Jakarta, and I believe you're in Indonesian yourself, you have kind of a network of different correspondents around the region.
Yeah, so Wonderwhy, we work together for our first issue, over 20 local contributors in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia as well. So we want to get the very local perspective, so we don't have to go to all these countries ourselves, and, you know, get to know what's happening, what's very, very local in the area.
And this magazine is being sold in newsstands, or are you guys doing subscriptions? So if someone wants to get hold of a copy of Wonderwhy, what should they do?
Currently, we're available in stockists all over Southeast Asia, but we also recently just sent a batch to the UK. So thanks to our friends in Ryan Ollie, we're hoping that the magazine will be available for readers in UK to buy very soon, hopefully by January.
Because people are, as I said, Hannah, they want to go to Southeast Asia. I hear this from my friends. You know, everybody when they talk about travel trends for next year. So I think it's the right time as well for you to be selling, not only in the UK and hopefully other European countries, the US as well.
Yeah, we're looking forward to selling our magazines in other regions as well. So Europe, America, and other Asian countries. So Japan, Korea.
I wonder if you could give us a taster of what's on issue 1. Not everything, but perhaps some of the stories that are featured there that you think it's interesting to mention.
So in City Walker, we have local communities in Southeast Asia, so people who like to walk, skateboarding communities in Vietnam, analog photographers in Jakarta. We also have extremists, so people who walk really long distances, like monks from Thailand. They walk from Thailand to Indonesia to celebrate Vesak Day. And also there's also a tribe in Indonesia. It's called the Baduy tribe. Because of their culture, they cannot wear footwear. They don't wear shoes or sandals. So they walk barefoot everywhere. So they walk over 100 kilometers, I think, to visit their friends. And they're very fit. And even though they walk in like very muddy regions, they're really fast.
That's fascinating. And I was wondering as well, what are the plans for 2025? You kind of already mentioned that already, that it's coming to the UK in January. But how often are you planning to release other issues of Wonderwhy?
We're looking to launch 3 to 4 issues next year. So that's our plan. So our big idea is we'll try to consistently give our readers the best stories behind the emerging culture in Southeast Asia. We're looking forward to launching our second issue in January. So the topic is going to be about the rising child-free phenomenon. It's quite a taboo topic here in Southeast Asia, but a much-needed one.
It's great. So it's not just about transport, about cities itself, but also about cultural trends as well, in a way, right?
Yes. So we're looking to see the emerging cultures of Southeast Asia. So our first issue is about city walkers. The next one is about child-free phenomenons. In the future issues, we'll talk about like foods and maybe sleep and other daily life activities.
And Hana, I'm curious, you are based in Jakarta, I believe. How is the magazine scene there? I mean, what do Indonesians consume when it comes to magazines and newspapers? Is it a very thriving scene? How do you see when you go to a local newsstand?
So magazines, I don't think there's a lot of local magazines here, but Indonesians are very creative. I've seen a growing zine community. So people are very crafty. They try resource printing and a lot of different materials. But as for magazine, there are some, but not so much.
Thank you, Hana. And you can find out more about Wonderwhy on wonderwhyc.com. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Juras. If you have any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com or subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. See you next week. You've been listening to The Stack, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco.